In the spring of 2004, a 5-year-old boy named Mark Reynolds was playing near his family's campsite at Whiting Ranch Wilderness Park in Orange County, California, when a mountain lion came out of the brush and took him. His family was nearby. The attack was fast enough and quiet enough that the first indication something had happened was his absence. Rangers found the child's body in the park, with wounds consistent with a predatory attack by a large feline. The following day, when search and response teams were in the park, a mountain lion attacked a group of mountain bikers on a trail not far from where the child had been killed. One biker, Anne Hiela, was seized and dragged off her bicycle. Her riding partner, Debbie Nichols, held onto Hiela's legs, while other riders threw rocks and sticks at the animal until it released her. Hiela survived, with severe facial injuries. A subsequent search of the area located the lion, which was killed. DNA testing confirmed it had killed the child. The animal was a young male, approximately 2 to 3 years old, in nutritionally compromised condition. The incident received substantial media coverage at the time. The coverage was accurate in its specifics. What it did not do, and what the official communications that followed it also declined to do, was place the incident in the context of a directional trend that was already visible in the data by 2004 and has become more visible every year since. California had already been accumulating mountain lion attack incidents at a rate that distinguished it from every other state in the Union. The Whiting Ranch attacks were not an anomaly in a story of extreme rarity. They were a data point in a story of incremental but measurable increase in the frequency and proximity of predatory encounters between mountain lions and humans in a specific state, in specific terrain, under specific conditions that were producing specific outcomes with a consistency that deserved and still deserves a more direct accounting than it has received. If you find this kind of story worth following, the kind of story that takes a phenomenon people dismiss as statistical noise and asks what is actually happening underneath the surface, consider subscribing. There is more where this comes from, and it only gets more detailed from here. California is not the most dangerous state for mountain lion encounters because it has the most mountain lions, though it does. It is not the most dangerous state simply because it has the most people living adjacent to mountain lion habitat, though it does. It is the most dangerous state because it has created, through a specific combination of policy decisions, ecological conditions, and demographic realities, the most concentrated and sustained version of the interface problem that defines human mountain lion coexistence across the entire American West. Understanding why requires understanding the mountain lion itself, the California-specific policy history that shaped the current population, the terrain where the problem is most acute, and the behavioral science that explains the mechanism by which extremely rare events become slightly less rare in ways that matter enormously if you are the person standing on the trail when the calculus shifts. Begin with the animal. The mountain lion, Puma concolor, is the most widely distributed large land mammal in the Western Hemisphere. Its range extends from the Yukon to the southern tip of South America. It inhabits desert, tropical forest, boreal forest, scrubland, grassland, and everything in between. It is a dietary generalist within the category of large ungulate prey, taking deer, elk, bighorn sheep, pronghorn, peccaries, guanacos, capybaras, and dozens of other species, depending on what is available in its territory. It is a solitary ambush predator that uses cover, patience, and an extraordinary final burst of speed and power to close distance on prey and execute a killing bite, typically to the back of the skull or the neck vertebrae. A large male mountain lion in California weighs between 130 and 180 pounds, is capable of covering enormous distances in a night, and can kill a 300-pound deer by itself with reliable consistency. It is, by any reasonable assessment, one of the most capable and effective predators on the continent. It is also an animal with a documented and genuine tendency to avoid humans that is not a myth or a public relations narrative. The historical record of human mountain lion interaction in North America is, as a raw count of fatalities, startlingly thin for an animal of this capability and this distribution. The total confirmed death toll from mountain lion attacks in all of recorded North American history, from the earliest colonial documents through the present day, sits at approximately 27 people. Not 27 per year, not 27 per decade. 27 people across roughly 400 years of documented contact between a large, capable predator and a human population that has expanded from a few 100,000 to 300 million across the continent where the predator lives. That is a number so small that parsing the statistics of it almost feels absurd. The rarity is genuine. The rarity has a biological explanation. And the rarity, understood correctly, is actually the foundation from which the current trend's significance can be properly appreciated, rather than a reason to dismiss the trend. Mountain lions avoid humans not because they cannot kill them. They avoid humans because their predatory system evolved to target prey that behaves like prey, and humans, in their default state, do not behave like prey in ways that match the mountain lion's template. The prey recognition system of an ambush predator is not a generalized threat assessment module. It is a highly tuned pattern matching system that identifies potential prey through a combination of size, movement, behavioral signal, and scent profile, and initiates the predatory sequence when enough of those parameters align with the template built by evolutionary history and refined by individual experience. The template was built on deer, on elk, on bighorn sheep, on animals that move in specific ways, make specific sounds, respond to detection by fleeing or by forming defensive groups that present hooves and horns to the predator. An adult human being, standing upright, making eye contact, speaking loudly, and moving with the upright bipedal gait of a species that did not evolve on this continent as prey for this predator does not match that template cleanly. The mountain lion's assessment of cost and risk, which is not conscious deliberation but is nonetheless real and functional, is disrupted by the mismatch. The animal withdraws. This is not magic. It is not evidence that mountain lions are fundamentally timid or that they have some evolved deference to human beings. It is the behavioral expression of a predatory system encountering a stimulus that does not adequately match its activation parameters, combined with a risk calculation that is always running in the background of a predator that knows it can be injured in hunts and calibrates its pursuit decisions accordingly. When the mismatch is large enough, the mountain lion's response is to disengage. This is the normal case. This is the situation that produces the 27 confirmed fatalities across 4 centuries. This is the baseline from which everything else is a departure. The departures happen under conditions that modify the two factors in opposite directions simultaneously. They reduce the human's failure to match the prey template, and they reduce the lion's threshold for accepting injury risk in pursuit. The conditions that produce these modifications are not mysterious. They are documented in the attack record with a clarity that, once you have read enough incident reports, becomes almost formulaic. The victim is small, often a child or a small adult, which reduces the size mismatch with ungulate prey. The victim is running, which activates the chase response with a power that overrides template matching incompatibilities. The encounter happens at dawn or dusk, when predatory arousal is highest, and visual conditions reduce the clarity of the behavioral signals that trigger avoidance. The lion involved is nutritionally stressed, which lowers the threshold of its prey selectivity. The lion has had extensive prior exposure to human presence without negative reinforcement, which has eroded its wariness. One or two of these conditions in combination is significant. All 5 together produces the subset of encounters in which the mountain lion's behavior toward humans becomes indistinguishable from its behavior toward natural prey. California has been assembling these conditions in concentrated form since 1990. The year 1990 is the pivot point in the California mountain lion story. In November of that year, California voters passed Proposition 117, the California Wildlife Protection Act, which prohibited the sport hunting of mountain lions in the state and designated the species a specially protected mammal. The measure passed with 52% of the vote. It was a genuine expression of public sentiment about wildlife in a state that had, by 1990, developed a powerful and organized conservation advocacy community and a public broadly sympathetic to the protection of charismatic megafauna. The arguments in favor were sincere, and many of them were well-founded. Mountain lions had been subject to bounty hunting in California from the 19th century through 1963, followed by a period of reduced, but still significant, lethal management. And the population had been suppressed well below its ecological carrying capacity. The hunting prohibition was designed to allow the population to recover toward that capacity. It succeeded. The mountain lion population in California, at the time of the proposition's passage, was estimated at between 2,500 and 3,000 animals. The current estimate ranges from 4,000 to 6,000 animals, though some researchers believe the true number may be higher in specific subregions where habitat quality and prey abundance are high. The population recovery is a genuine conservation achievement. Mountain lions are keystone predators, whose presence in an ecosystem shapes prey population dynamics, vegetation structure, and the abundance and behavior of mesopredators in ways that produce cascading benefits across the food web. Their restoration to something approaching carrying capacity in California's diverse habitat mosaic is, from an ecological standpoint, a success story. The complication is that the terrain into which the population recovered was not the terrain it had occupied before suppression. California's human population grew from roughly 20 million in 1963 to nearly 40 million by 2020. The developed footprint of that population expanded into the coastal ranges, the foothills, the chaparral systems, and the riparian corridors that constitute prime mountain lion habitat across the state. The mountain lions recovered into a landscape that had been fundamentally altered in their absence, one in which the boundary between lion habitat and human habitat was not a line but a gradient, and in much of the state, a very steep and compressed gradient at that. The result was not simply more mountain lions in more places. It was more mountain lions in specific places where the density of human activity was exceptionally high, and where the physical barriers to dispersal, specifically the freeway infrastructure that crisscrosses Southern California in a pattern of extraordinary density, meant that population pressure accumulated in isolated habitat patches rather than dissipating across a broader landscape. In the Santa Ana Mountains, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, in the Diablo Range, in the Coast Ranges north of Los Angeles and south of San Francisco, mountain lion populations grew in bounded terrain that brought them into sustained, close, and repeated contact with millions of human beings in ways that had no historical precedent in the species' documented behavior in California. The Santa Ana Mountains deserve extended attention because they represent the most intensively studied and the most ecologically compressed version of this problem anywhere in the species range. The Santa Anas are a relatively small mountain range, roughly 60 miles long and 15 miles wide, running southeast to northwest, between the greater Los Angeles urban area and the greater San Diego urban area. They are flanked on the west and north by the 91, the 5, and the 241 freeways. They are flanked on the east by the 15 freeway, one of the highest traffic freight corridors on the west coast. The interior of the range contains significant wildland habitat, Cleveland National Forest, several state parks, and a network of protected land that together constitute one of the most important remaining mountain lion habitats in Southern California. The problem is the boundaries. The freeways that define the range's edges are lethal barriers for mountain lions. GPS collar data from the National Park Service's ongoing study of mountain lions in the region has documented what happens to young males in this population when they reach dispersal age and attempt to establish territories outside the range they were born into. They encounter the freeways. Many of them are killed by vehicles in those attempts. A small number make it across. Most of the ones that survive the crossing attempt eventually turn around or are killed before they can establish in the terrain on the other side. The consequence is demographic. A mountain lion population that cannot disperse is a population that is compressing its density within its bounded habitat. Territorial competition intensifies. Young males that have not yet established territories are pushed into the margins of the range, including the urban and suburban interfaces that adjoin the wildland areas. Those margins are where the human population is densest. Those margins are where the interactions are most frequent and where the habituation process proceeds most rapidly. The National Park Service data shows, with unusual clarity, that the lions in the Santa Ana population are spending significantly more time in developed terrain than their counterparts in less fragmented habitats. They are hunting in drainage corridors between residential developments. They are resting within a few hundred yards of occupied homes. They are using road culverts and concrete-lined flood control channels as movement corridors through terrain that would otherwise be impassable. They have incorporated the built environment into their home ranges as functional habitat in a way that is ecologically remarkable and behaviorally consequential. The habituation that follows from this sustained exposure to human-dominated terrain has been documented not just in behavioral observation, but in physiological stress indicators. Mountain lions in the Santa Ana population show cortisol levels, the hormone associated with stress response, that are elevated compared to lions in less fragmented terrain, but that are also declining over time in the population, which means the animals are physiologically adapting to the stress of living at the human-wildlife interface rather than remaining in a state of chronic stress that would eventually suppress their fitness. They are getting used to it. The stress response that originally accompanied close proximity to human activity is diminishing through habituation. The wariness that expressed itself physiologically as elevated stress hormones is being down-regulated. This is not a comfortable finding if you are interested in the behavioral implications for human safety. An animal that has stopped being stressed by human presence has stopped treating human presence as a signal for withdrawal. The prey dynamics within the Santa Ana population add another dimension that directly connects to attack risk. The Colombian black-tailed deer of the coastal ranges are the primary prey base for mountain lions throughout Southern California. Deer populations in the Santa Ana Mountains have been subject to the same habitat fragmentation pressures as the lions, as well as direct competition with human land use for the oak woodland and chaparral habitats that support them. The deer population within the range's wildland core is not sufficiently large or stable to support the mountain lion population at carrying capacity without significant nutritional stress in the population, particularly among young animals and particularly in dry years when vegetation quality is reduced and deer condition declines. Mountain lions in nutritional stress are documented in the Santa Ana population at rates that reflect this ecological constraint. When GPS-collared lions in this population are recovered dead, a significant proportion show signs of starvation or near starvation, combined with secondary causes, such as vehicle strike or disease, suggesting an underlying nutritional deficit that left them vulnerable to other mortality sources. A mountain lion that is both habituated to human presence and nutritionally stressed has had two of its fundamental behavioral constraints on attacking humans weakened simultaneously. This combination is not hypothetical. It is the documented profile of the animals involved in the most serious attacks and predatory approaches toward humans in the California incident record. The Whiting Ranch lion was a young male in poor nutritional condition. The lion that attacked a woman hiking in Cupertino in 2018 was assessed after lethal removal to be in below normal body condition. The lion that stalked and mock-charged a group of hikers in Puma Canyon in San Diego County in 2019 before being hazed off was later estimated by field biologists as a subadult male in the dispersal phase, the period of maximum nutritional stress and minimum territorial security. These are not coincidences of individual animal pathology. They are the expected outputs of a system that is regularly producing animals with this behavioral and physiological profile in terrain where millions of people recreate every week. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife maintains an incident database that tracks mountain lion encounters, attacks, and depredations on livestock and pets across the state. The data in that database, examined as a time series from 1986 to the present, shows a pattern that is not ambiguous in its direction. The number of verified mountain lion encounters with humans in California, which includes sightings at close range, stalking behavior, and actual attacks, has increased decade over decade since the hunting prohibition took effect. The rate of increase is not uniform. There are years with higher and lower counts, and the variance is large enough at the annual scale that individual years are not meaningful. But the decadal trend is consistent. The 1990s saw more incidents than the 1980s. The 2000s saw more than the 1990s. The 2010s saw more than the 2000s. The early 2020s are tracking above the 2010s rate. At each step in that progression, Wildlife Agency communications have emphasized that attacks remain rare in the absolute sense, which is true, while declining to describe the direction of the trend line, which is less comfortable. The absolute number of mountain lion attacks on humans in California since 1986 is not large, but when that absolute number is placed next to the absolute numbers from every other state, the California exceptionalism becomes clear. No other state comes close to California's accumulated attack count over the same period. Colorado, which has the second highest attack count in the United States, has had roughly half as many confirmed attacks as California over comparable time frames. Washington, Oregon, and Arizona, states with substantial mountain lion populations and significant human recreational presence in mountain lion habitat, lag further still. The gap between California and every other state is not explained by California having vastly more mountain lions than any other state, because the population estimates for California, while the highest in the lower 48, are not so much higher than populations in other western states that the attack rate differential should be as large as it is. Something structural about California's situation is producing attacks at a rate that exceeds what simple population math would predict. That structural factor is the interface, the compression. The habitat fragmentation that prevents dispersal accumulates population pressure in bounded terrain and produces the habituated, nutritionally stressed individuals who represent the attack risk. The geography of California mountain lion attacks is not random. It is concentrated in specific regions with specific characteristics. The coastal mountains of Southern California, including the Santa Ana Mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, and the Laguna Hills area, account for a disproportionate share of the state's incidence. The coastal ranges of the San Francisco Bay Area, including the areas around Mount Diablo, the Marin Headlands, and the open space preserves of the South Bay, account for a significant cluster. The foothills of the western Sierra Nevada, particularly in the regions where developed foothill communities abut national forest and BLM land, produce a consistent stream of encounter reports. These are the places where the density of human recreational activity is highest within mountain lion territory, and where the terrain creates the kind of close-quarter encounter probability that the more open wildlands of the interior West do not. In the Santa Monica Mountains, where the National Park Service has been tracking individual mountain lions by GPS collar since 2002, the tracking data shows lions spending substantial time in areas where they are within a few hundred meters of residential neighborhoods, golf courses, and recreational trails with heavy human traffic. The encounters in this terrain are not surprises. They are the predictable output of a system that places large, capable predators and large numbers of recreating humans in the same complex terrain with no separation buffer worth the name. The trail running dimension of the California incident data deserves particular attention, because trail running as a recreation category has grown faster in California than virtually anywhere else in the country, and because California's trail running terrain is, in large portions of the state, highly coincident with high-density mountain lion habitat. The increase in trail running participation from 2008 to 2023 is estimated at more than 300% nationally, with California accounting for a disproportionate share of that growth by sheer population mass. The network of trail systems in the Santa Monica Mountains, the Marin Headlands, Mount Tamalpais, the foothills of the Eastern Bay Area, and the open space preserves of San Diego County supports a trail running community numbering in the hundreds of thousands. These trail systems pass through, across, and along the movement corridors of resident mountain lion populations. They do so at hours of maximum predatory activity, because trail runners, like most California outdoor recreationists, concentrate their activity in the early morning and late evening hours when temperatures are manageable, which are the same hours when mountain lions are most active and most likely to be on the move. The trail runner's behavioral profile from the perspective of a mountain lion's prey recognition system is worth examining carefully. A trail runner in terrain with low visibility, running at a pace of 7 to 9 minutes per mile, produces a specific combination of stimuli: movement at speed in a consistent direction, a size that, for smaller runners, approaches the size range of larger deer species, a noise profile that is lower than a casual hiker's, because trail runners tend not to talk and do not make the continuous, unpredictable noise that signals complex social cognition to a predator. A predictable trajectory along a fixed path that allows a mountain lion to position itself ahead of the runner's approach with the patience and precision that the species is extraordinarily capable of. The trail runner is also, because of the demands of the activity, almost never in a group large enough to provide the protective effect that groups confer in mountain lion encounter scenarios. Solo trail running is common. Two-person running partnerships are common. Groups of 3 to 5 are the practical upper limit for most trail running activity in California's more remote trail systems. These group sizes are at or below the threshold where the protective effect of numbers becomes reliably powerful. The encounters that California trail runners have had with mountain lions over the past 2 decades span the full range, from brief sightings of a lion crossing the trail to stalking incidents to actual physical attacks. The proportion of those encounters that involved predatory behavior, meaning behavior consistent with active prey assessment and pursuit rather than coincidental contact and mutual withdrawal, is higher in the California trail running incident record than in comparable data from other states. This is partly a function of the population dynamics discussed above: the habituation, the nutritional stress, the demographic compression in bounded habitat. It is also partly a function of the terrain. California's coastal mountain trails are narrow, heavily vegetated, and characterized by the combination of dense chaparral and broken topography that is optimal mountain lion hunting terrain. They are not the open meadow and talus slope trails of the higher Rockies, where long sight lines reduce the ambush potential and mutual detection at distance reduces the probability of close-range encounters. They are tunnels through dense brush that open into small clearings and then close again, with sight lines measured in dozens of feet rather than hundreds of yards, and with the kind of acoustic environment in which a running human produces a consistent approach signal that a stationary lion in the brush can track and position against. The management response to the California mountain lion situation is complicated by the political and legal context that the 1990 hunting prohibition created. Proposition 117 designated mountain lions as specially protected mammals and prohibited their sport hunting. It also established specific legal procedures for the lethal removal of individual mountain lions that have attacked humans or domestic animals. Procedures that require depredation permits, confirmation of identity between the attacking animal and the one proposed for removal, and in some cases, create timelines that are operationally challenging in emergency situations. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife operates within this framework and has developed considerable operational expertise in navigating it. Individual animals that attack humans or show the behavioral profile of imminent attack risk are removed with reasonable speed in most documented cases. The Whiting Ranch lions were removed within hours of the attacks. Animals that have killed livestock or pets under circumstances suggesting they will do so again are typically removed within days. The problem is the systemic one. Lethal removal of individual animals is a response to symptoms. The conditions producing habituated, nutritionally stressed individuals in peri-urban terrain are not addressed by the removal of any particular animal. A young male pushed into the Santa Ana Mountains urban fringe by territorial competition and dispersal failure, spending months learning that the drainage corridors behind residential developments are safe movement routes, gradually down-regulating its wariness of human activity and entering a period of nutritional stress during a dry year when deer are thin and scarce. That animal is being produced by a system. When it is removed after an incident, the next animal in the same demographic and ecological situation, the next young dispersing male in poor nutritional condition, in habituated condition in compressed terrain, faces the same inputs and may produce the same outputs. The management response of removing problem individuals is both necessary and, by itself, insufficient. It addresses the specific animal and the specific immediate risk. It does not address the factory. The wildlife crossing infrastructure conversation is where the long-term management question becomes most concrete and most actionable. The Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing over the 101 freeway in Agoura Hills, a 210-foot-wide vegetated bridge across a 10-lane highway that separates the Santa Monica Mountains from the wildlands to the north, was completed in late 2023 after over a decade of advocacy, planning, fundraising, and construction. It is the largest wildlife crossing in the world. It is designed to reconnect the isolated mountain lion population of the Santa Monica Mountains with the broader metapopulation of Southern California, allowing gene flow and dispersal that the freeway barrier had been preventing for decades. The animals whose isolated condition had been producing the inbreeding coefficients, the demographic pressure, the competitive intensity that pushed young males into the urban fringe, those animals now have a functional connection to a larger landscape. Whether they will use it and whether the broader population will respond to the demographic relief will be answerable in the GPS collar data within a few years of the crossing's completion. The Santa Monica Mountains crossing is one structure across one freeway. The freeway network of Southern California alone includes hundreds of miles of high-speed, high-volume roads that function as effective barriers to mountain lion movement. The I-15 corridor that defines the eastern edge of the Santa Ana Mountains has no wildlife crossing infrastructure at any point where mountain lions are documented attempting to cross. The 91 freeway corridor along the northern edge of the Santa Anas similarly has none. The highway corridors that separate other significant mountain lion subpopulations in Northern California, in the Central Coast Ranges, in the Sierra foothills, are mostly without crossing infrastructure. The funding mechanisms, the regulatory processes, and the public advocacy required to build crossing structures at the scale needed to meaningfully address the fragmentation problem across California's mountain lion habitat are not in place. The Annenberg crossing took more than a decade to fund and build, with an extraordinary concentration of philanthropic, government, and advocacy resources that is not easily replicated at the scale the problem requires. The conversation about mountain lion management in California exists within a broader political context that shapes what kinds of solutions are discussable in official forums. The 1990 hunting prohibition was a public will expression that has been durable. Multiple subsequent legislative and ballot efforts to restore some form of regulated mountain lion hunting to California have failed, partly because the public that supported the original prohibition is still there and still cares, and partly because the framing of those efforts as a human safety measure has been difficult to sustain against the statistical baseline of rarity. The argument that sport hunting of mountain lions improves human safety has been genuinely contested among wildlife biologists, and the data for it is not as clean as its proponents have suggested. Sport hunting does not selectively target the habituated, nutritionally stressed individuals who represent the actual attack risk. It targets animals that are detectable and accessible to hunters, which is a different population subset. The management tool that would most directly address the behavioral profile of the lions who attack humans is not a general hunting season, but targeted removal of specific animals, showing specific behavioral indicators, which is already legally available under the current framework through depredation permits and public safety permits. What California's management toolbox is actually missing is not the hunting prohibition's reversal, but rather investment in the non-lethal management infrastructure that reduces the probability of producing problem animals in the first place. That means wildlife corridor investment at scale. It means deer population management that keeps prey availability at levels sufficient to reduce nutritional stress in the mountain lion population. It means land use planning in the interface zones that preserves functional movement corridors and prevents the kind of residential penetration into wildland terrain that maximizes habituation exposure. It means public education that is accurate about the current risk landscape, rather than defaulting to the rarity baseline as the complete picture. And it means data transparency from wildlife management agencies that allows the public to see the trend clearly enough to make informed decisions about their own behavior in the field and about the policy investments they want their governments to make. The public education gap is one of the most consequential and least addressed dimensions of the California mountain lion situation. The official communications from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife about mountain lion risk are accurate in what they say. They are incomplete in ways that are not accidental. The standard messaging emphasizes the extreme rarity of attacks, provides the behavioral guidance for encounters, and contextualizes the risk statistically against other causes of outdoor injury and death. All of this is correct, and none of it is the full picture. What the messaging does not do is tell people about the trend. It does not tell people that the attack rate in California is higher than any other state and has been increasing over the past 3 decades. It does not tell people that the regions with the highest incident density are specific and identifiable, and that people recreating in those regions are operating in a different risk environment than the statewide rarity figure would suggest. It does not tell people that children playing outside unattended in backyards adjacent to wildland in those regions face a specific risk that the word rare does not adequately describe. It does not tell people that the combined conditions of habituation and nutritional stress in bounded populations produce animals whose behavioral relationship to human beings has fundamentally shifted from the wild conditioned baseline. The reasons for this incompleteness are not malicious. Wildlife agencies face a genuine communication dilemma. Overstating attack risk produces panic responses that are counterproductive to conservation, potentially drives political support for measures like unrestricted lethal control that agencies regard as ecologically harmful, and may discourage the outdoor recreation that is both important to public health and important to building the kind of public attachment to wildlands that underlies conservation funding and political support. Understating it, or stating only the part that is most reassuring, leaves people making decisions about their own behavior and their children's safety without the information they need to make those decisions well. The balance point between those two failure modes is honest, specific, contextually appropriate communication about what the data shows, including its direction, rather than a static description of the historical baseline as though the world has not changed since that baseline was established. The parents of young children in Southern California's wildland interface communities deserve to know, specifically, that the mountain lion populations in their region include individuals whose wariness of humans has been substantially eroded by habituation, that those individuals have been documented within operational proximity to residential areas and their associated trail systems, and that children playing outside in terrain adjacent to chaparral or riparian vegetation in those communities should not be doing so unattended. This is not panic language. It is the same kind of specific, actionable guidance that public health agencies provide about water quality or air quality or other environmental risks that the public cannot directly observe but that are relevant to their daily decisions. The mountain lion risk, in specific parts of California, is not invisible data. It is in the incident reports. It is in the GPS collar tracking data. It is in the behavioral assessments of wildlife biologists who work in the field in these regions. The gap is between what the data shows and what the communication to the public reflects. The children who have been killed or seriously injured by mountain lions in California represent a specific demographic subset of the attack record that carries the most direct implications for public policy. Mark Reynolds at Whiting Ranch in 2004. The child injured at Big Tujunga Campground in 1994. The children stalked and mock-charged in multiple incidents at playgrounds and campgrounds in the wildland interface, from the 1990s through the present. These incidents are distributed across time and geography in a pattern that reflects the conditions discussed throughout this account. They cluster in the regions of highest human mountain lion interface density. They involve animals that show reduced wariness. They involve victims whose size and behavioral signature most closely approximates the prey template. The pattern in the record is not obscure. It is visible to anyone who reads the incident data without the frame of rarity preloaded as the conclusion. The domestic dog data adds another dimension. Dogs are attacked by mountain lions in California at a rate that dwarfs the human attack rate, and that has been increasing in parallel with the human incident trend. The attack on a human's dog is not, in itself, a human safety incident. But the conditions under which domestic dogs are attacked by mountain lions are directly relevant to human safety in two ways. First, a dog being attacked is usually attached to a human being by a leash or at close proximity, and the spatial relationship between the dog and the human in those incidents is close enough that the attack on the dog constitutes a direct exposure for the human. Second, a mountain lion that has successfully killed domestic dogs has had its predatory experience with human proximate prey reinforced in a way that moves it along the gradient toward greater comfort with attacks in human-adjacent settings. The dog kill is not a step toward attacking humans in some linear progression of desensitization, but it is evidence of a behavioral state, willingness to hunt in close proximity to human activity, that is a necessary condition for the attacks on humans that have occurred. The hikers who encounter mountain lions in California and experience stalking behavior which the incident data records at a rate that has been increasing, are experiencing the intermediate level of this behavioral shift. A mountain lion that follows a hiker for 300 yards along a trail, maintaining visual contact, closing distance when the hiker moves faster, stopping when the hiker stops and faces it, is not casually passing through the same area. It is engaged in prey assessment behavior. It is testing the target's responses. The encounter resolves without attack when the human performs the behavioral script correctly, facing the animal, making noise, appearing large, refusing to run. The encounter resolves differently when those conditions are not met, when the person does not know the animal is behind them, or when they panic and run, or when the person is small enough that the behavioral response is not convincing enough to override the assessment already in progress. The hikers who have reported these stalking incidents in California in recent years are coming from the same terrain that produces the attack incidents. The Santa Monica Mountains Trail reports include stalking incidents involving solo hikers and solo joggers at a frequency that, for a trail system in a major metropolitan area, represents a risk environment that the general public is not being clearly informed about. The East Bay Regional Park District, trails in the hills above Oakland and Berkeley, produce encounter reports consistently enough that the district's own staff are familiar with specific territories and specific individuals as recurrent concerns. The trails of the Santa Cruz Mountains between San Jose and Santa Cruz have been the site of enough close encounters and one serious attack. In 2020, when a mountain lion attacked a man running on a trail near Boulder Creek and he fought it off. That local trail running communities have developed informal warning systems and recommendation protocols that go substantially beyond the official public guidance. The 2020 Boulder Creek incident is worth examining because it captures the specifics of the risk environment with unusual clarity. The victim was a man trail running solo on a trail in the redwood forest terrain of the Santa Cruz Mountains. The attack happened in the late afternoon, within the window of elevated predatory activity. The lion came from behind and above, the classic ambush geometry, and made contact before the runner was aware of its presence. The man sustained injuries to his upper body and head and was able to fight the animal off and escape. He was experienced in the terrain. He was not a naive novice, and the attack happened anyway because the conditions on the trail that afternoon aligned the relevant risk factors in the specific configuration that the historical record consistently associates with predatory attacks. He survived because he was physically capable of fighting back effectively and did so without hesitation. The incident was reported in regional media, received the standard wildlife agency contextualization of rarity, and was followed within weeks by trail runners returning to the same trail system at the same hours, with largely the same behavioral habits. The institutional memory of the incident was almost entirely absent from the trail running community's behavioral choices within a short time. This is the human side of the risk equation that is as important as the lion side. Human beings are extraordinarily poor at intuitively adjusting their behavior in response to probabilistic risks that are real but rare. We are wired for immediate, concrete threats, not for adjusted behavioral responses to elevated but still very low probability events. A person who was personally present at a mountain lion attack, or who knows someone who was, will modify their behavior accordingly. A person who reads about an attack in a media report that emphasizes rarity will not, in practice, change much about what they do on trails. The psychology of risk perception is working against the behavioral response that would reduce the already very low probability of an incident in any individual case. Wildlife agencies that communicate rarity without direction are, possibly without intending to, reinforcing the cognitive tendency to discount the risk entirely. The trail running community's relationship to mountain lion risk guidance is instructive precisely because it is a community with high levels of education, genuine engagement with the outdoor environment, and access to whatever information it wants. Trail runners in California know about mountain lions. They can find the safety guidelines easily. They understand the statistical context, and they run alone at dawn in terrain that the incident data identifies as elevated risk with their earbuds in, at a pace that activates the chase response in any lion close enough to detect them. The gap between knowing the risk and modifying behavior in response to it is not a knowledge gap. It is a psychology gap that accurate risk communication, presented honestly and specifically, rather than softened by statistical reassurance, is somewhat better positioned to close. The species-level question about what mountain lions are becoming in California's most heavily fragmented and human-adjacent habitats is the deepest and most consequential version of the inquiry. Mountain lion behavior is not fixed. It is partly instilled by evolutionary history and partly shaped by individual learning and experience. An individual mountain lion's behavioral relationship to human beings is not solely determined by its genetics. It is shaped by what it experienced during its development, by whether it learned wariness from exposure to human-caused mortality of lions in its cohort, by whether it grew up in terrain where humans were regularly present and never associated with negative outcomes. The mountain lion population of the Santa Ana Mountains is now several generations removed from a time when human-caused mortality, specifically sport hunting, provided the consistent, negative reinforcement that maintained population-wide wariness of humans. The animals being born and raised in that range today are not growing up in a context that teaches wariness in the way that a hunted population learns it. This is not an argument that hunting solves the problem. The relationship between sport hunting and population-level wariness is real, but it is not a simple dial that can be turned up or down by adjusting hunting pressure. It is one factor among several in a complex behavioral ecology. The more important point is that the accumulation of conditions producing reduced wariness in the Santa Ana population and in other California mountain lion populations in heavily interfaced terrain is systemic rather than incidental. It is the predictable outcome of the ecological and policy situation that has developed over 30+ years. The trajectory of that outcome is toward a mountain lion population in specific regions whose members have a fundamentally different and more dangerous behavioral relationship to human beings than the wild conditioned populations that produced the historical baseline of near-zero attacks. The pace of change is slow. The absolute attack numbers remain small. The rarity remains real. But the direction is not ambiguous, and the mechanisms producing it are understood well enough to describe them with confidence. The question for California's policymakers, wildlife managers, and public is not whether the trend is happening. It is whether the policy and management infrastructure required to address it at the systemic level will be built before the trend advances far enough that the response is reactive rather than preventive. Wildlife crossings at the scale the fragmentation problem requires. Deer population management that keeps the prey base stable. Land use planning that preserves functional corridors and buffers. Public communication that gives people an honest description of the risk landscape they are entering when they go into the Santa Anas or the Santa Cruz Mountains or the Oakland Hills at dawn with their dog off-leash. None of these are simple or cheap or politically frictionless. All of them are more tractable than the problem they are designed to prevent, which is the continued and accelerating production